The race is on, and Red Bull kicked off F1's launch season with a flashy event in Detroit, revealing a glossy revised livery and giving us some hints about expectations for 2026. So what did we learn about the hopes for the new power unit, Max Verstappen's ambitions, and how big is Ford's involvement really? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me for our first bite of the new season is John Noble. Well, John, many of those listening, particularly in Europe, won't have been watching the event when it was actually put out on YouTube in the middle of the night. So what did you make of it?
Well, I actually must confess to kind of joining them because we obviously, because of the timing of it, I think the livery reveals at 3:45 a.m. We obviously had to do a bit of a split shift yesterday. So I did a bit of work yesterday evening, went to sleep and got up super early to kind of pick up, I think when you went to bed about 4 o'clock this morning. So I watched it delayed. So I watched it a bit afterwards, but I think it was even delayed for you, wasn't it? Wasn't it not actually live? Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. It was maybe 3 hours delayed or something like that. So they did it kind of as live, but obviously photos from the event had leaked and that kind of thing. And I think the Red Bull Powertrain's boss, Ben Hodgkinson, mentioned that it was around midnight, which didn't align with the times in the UK. He was there via video link up. So, yeah, everybody was experiencing it in different time zones. So no matter what you did, unless you were actually there, you weren't experiencing it fully in real time. But I tip my hat to any F1 fans and Red Bull fans in Europe who did get up and watch it at 3 or 4 a.m. That's quite some dedication, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I watched it delayed. I thought it wasn't too bad as a launch. Sometimes launches can have a lot of filler and irrelevant stuff. And I think Red Bull in the past have been quite guilty of holding an F1 launch and then having 45 minutes to an hour of random athletes and random elements of their marketing programs and silly stunts and stuff when all people want to see is a car or a livery or some details. And actually, what I liked about this launch was a lot of talk about engines and Red Bull powertrains and the Ford element and digging into a bit of the kind of technical details and challenges and realism. So I think it filtered more towards the kind of the interest that I had, which made me actually think it wasn't too bad, actually.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be noisy and pointless and just to be furious having to get up to watch it. But actually, for this sort of event, I thought it was pretty good. I also thought that Ford weren't quite so forceful in terms of dominating being the engine maker. There was a lot of narrative about the building up of Red Bull powertrains from scratch, etc., which I thought was good because that is A, a real story, and B, it wasn't just whitewashed by the Ford involvement.
Yeah, obviously we had Bill Ford came out very, very first and gave that quote that I think a lot of people are going to be poring over about, we're going to be unstoppable, before Lauren Mekies gave a bit of a more realistic assessment of where the Red Bull project's at. But yeah, it wasn't overblown with Ford. It wasn't also then pretending that this is a Ford engine and they've done all the work and have thrown everything at it. A lot of kind of the Red Bull push, a lot of the journey that Red Bull's been on as well. Some of the behind the scenes footage from the factory I thought was quite interesting. Some of these, you can't go and see this. You can't take a picture here. You can't show your camera here. I've been to the Red Bull Powertrains facility 2 or 3 times now. Seen it evolve, seen it grow, seen it become the big beast that it is now. And it is a fascinating journey they're on. And I'm especially intrigued to see, how it goes and how this custom fit project can adapt to Formula One and take on manufacturers who've been there for decades.
Yeah, that's the huge question. And as Lauren Mekies said, it would be naive to expect them to be ahead of people who have been doing it for decades, for as much as 90 years, I think he said at one stage, which is obviously a reference to Ferrari, which is the other all under one roof, as they put it, although obviously there's multiple roofs involved, really, because I've lost count of how many buildings they've got on the Red Bull campus now, but it's a lot. They started off with 1 in Formula One when they moved in and gradually have expanded and taken over a big chunk of that industrial estate they are on. But yeah, it was interesting because they had the Red Bull launch, but they had Racing Bulls there. They had a little bit for F1 Academy. They had plenty of people talking about it. Lauren Mekies, Phil Prue from Powertrains was there. And as I mentioned, Ben Hodgkinson was piped in. The drivers were there, of course. The interesting thing was the cars, wasn't it? Because there were 2 different cars launched. Neither of them are genuine 2026 Formula One cars, but it wasn't just wall-to-wall standard show car, was it?
No, this was one of the intriguing aspects of the launch that in the past is another thing Red Bull have been guilty of, is when they've put a livery on a car. I think this is in 22 they did this, put a livery on the car and then claimed this was the definitive actual race car when it clearly wasn't. This time they were quite clear this is a livery on a show car. But the images we got, and this caused some intrigue last night when we first got images under embargo, was that there were two actual different show cars. So what was on stage at the event was a much more older spec version of a car. And the studio shots that we saw with the blues seemed brighter for Ford, was much more akin to 26. We had to check this wasn't like an early release of a 26 car. Had Red Bull done the complete opposite and said this is only a livery and actually released a 26 car, that's not the case. It is a show car. I think these show cars are, produced by one company, but teams can input what sort of kind of design they want, the aspects, the aero components. So this is from what we understand, is a Red Bull vision of the 2026 rules. So it's not necessarily what that 26 car is going to actually be like. I'm sure it's going to be totally different when we get to see it in the flesh. But this is the closest we've got yet to a up-close vision of how a 26 regs will shape cars.
Yeah, we're not drawing any conclusions from it, but it's just interesting to see some of the areas of variability. Obviously, the most obvious one is it's got push rod front suspension rather than pull rod. Now, we don't know for sure that's the case, but it would seem odd to have commissioned a show car with that configuration, unless at the time you commissioned it, that was your intention in design, unless you wanted to do something different. So that could well be significant. So it just gives us a start to see some of the little areas where you may see some divergence from the standard show car, which is based on the FIA stuff. So it's one of those things, fun to look at, given it's as good as we've got, but not to draw too many definitive conclusions from, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there may be philosophical trends in the cars. We've started seeing that. The spy shots we've got of the Audi from the shakedown gave us first clues about various little elements, and we've seen these on the Red Bull too, like the shark fins, the getting rid of the wheel covers, what teams are doing with the raised noses, where the cockpits can be. What are the side pods going to be like? Are we into in-wash territory or down-wash territory? So we're getting clues, but I don't think we're going to get answers, probably not properly detailed shots in Barcelona. We'll get shots in Bahrain, but this may not be the definitive car. I'm convinced the cars we see in Melbourne are going to be very, very different from what's launched over the next 7 days or so and what we're going to see in testing.
Yeah, I would say, to use that analogy I used on a podcast recently about the knowledge bucket that you're filling up, I reckon that Red Bull show car, the one they used for the images they released, not the one that was on site, which is a standard one, presumably, you'd guess that's a Ford-owned one. I think they dropped a few pipettes worth of fluid into the knowledge bucket with that, but nothing to hang your hat on, as it were. But it was interesting, that messaging, in terms of Red Bull being sensible and kind of long-term, Ford being very, very excited. I did enjoy Isaac Hadjar, who is very kind of direct when he's asked a question, and he was asked, what's your objective for the season? And he just said, well, maiden win would be nice, at least. And I really like that, because not because it was off message, but if you ask a racing driver what their objective is for the season, not even framing it as a realistic objective or what do you expect for the season, of course he wants to win a race and fight for a championship. So I like the fact that he had the leeway just to say what any self-respecting driver would really say.
Exactly, and decent English as well, because there's a lot of people get it wrong when they say I want my debut win, which isn't the case, because he's already had his debut that came last year. So knowing the difference
good one
between
for the sub editors,
knowing the difference between maiden and debut, I think is quite impressive as a second language. Yeah, very forthright. We didn't hear much from the drivers, actually. Only a couple of words from Isaac and Max, and then the Racing Bulls, I'm sure we'll get onto later. This was very much about the engine project, I think. This is much about Ford's involvement, Red Bull Powertrain's journey, where they've started from, where they are now, and eventually where they're going to, both, I think, this season and 5-10 years' time.
And a revised livery too. They were very excited about the little white keyline outlines they'd added. That got a few mentions, but I guess the main thing is it's gone glossy again. Yeah,
it's kind of gone back a little bit. They've kind of taken some old aspects of their livery. The gloss is a throwback. They've gone back to some more of the kind of chrome effects. The Ford blue is a lot darker. I know in the past Rebel have been criticised for having liveries that are virtually identical beyond title sponsors changing, but I think they've made a decent step this year. When I first saw it, for Red Bull livery, I quite liked it. So I think they've done a good job and can tick that box as a decent outcome.
Yeah, interestingly, an observation Scott Mitchell-Mann made to me while the event was happening and you were still being lazy and asleep, that actually if you look at the team kit, which is a very Ford blue, actually the personnel, certainly the drivers were looking at, well, and the team boss as well, were looking a lot more kind of Ford racing almost than Red Bull, which is just an interesting little thing. So there's little cues of the Ford identity. So it's interesting to see how that's all coming together, but not quite as flag wavy for Ford as we perhaps expected, despite that unstoppable quote, which right away I wrote down for future reference, especially if the car's very unreliable. Unstoppable would be a funny word to put over images of it, which would be a good thing to put on it if it stopped on track. And of course, loads of interest in this because it is the first event and the Red Bull is the start of 2026 launch season. That brings the biggest shake-up in F1 for a decade, new cars, new engines, and a new team. So that's why you need the Race Members Club, which lets you come behind the scenes with us. You'll be the first to know what's going on. There's trackside analysis, exclusive updates, bonus podcasts, videos ad-free as well. Everybody likes the ad-free environment, engaged community, which is really thriving. So many people in that, constant conversations, really, really enjoy it, and the chance to get closer to our team, should you want to do so. And John, you always enjoy the Members Club content. So over the coming weeks, what are you particularly looking forward to doing?
Well, I quite like the fact we've done a kind of what we call our ICI, which is the in-car insights. Last year in Vegas, we obviously did in-casino insights. But I think there's an opportunity at Alpine launch next week, Ed, isn't there, for us to do in-cruise ship insights? I think I'm quite looking forward to the kind of the cruise ship launch that's coming from Alpine.
Yeah, I'm thinking on-boat insights might sound better, although boat rather underplays the MSC cruise ship, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I just enjoy the Members Club because it's a bit of a different take on what we do. We can lift the curtain a bit on the job we do, speak about things, and it is a great little community with decent opinions, lots of good insight and analysis that sometimes there isn't room for us to write down what we know every single day, or we don't do podcasts every day. But I think what we can offer the members is something a little bit different that they can't get anywhere else.
Exactly, and it's great fun to be able to do that. Scott did a little behind-the-scenes thing that he recorded, who knows, at about 5 a.m, probably explaining how we'd dealt with stuff. We have film club, book club, in whatever mode of transport we're in, or casino insights that we regularly do. And why are we talking about the Race Members Club? Well, it's because we've got a special offer, a 7-day free trial of the Race Members Club, so you can get a taste of your F1 Paddock Pass for 2026 as you travel around the world with us for trackside analysis, exclusive updates, bonus content, and that thriving community. So sign up and find out what it's all about. Right, John, we've mentioned that the Power Unit project was a big narrative. You had the chance to hear directly from Ben Hodgkinson, the technical director of the programme. So what's been revealed about the progress that's been made?
Yeah, we spoke to him last night. I think this is before he decamped the dyno for their ongoing testing. I think they're doing race sims at the moment of Barcelona. Their key priority is to make sure that engine does as many laps as possible during the test that's coming up. So he elected to skip the launch, instead stay in Milton Keynes, so flat out there. I think what we've learned is that the foundations for it are very strong. So although Laura Mekies has talked about sleepless nights to come and difficulties and headaches, which are inevitable for a new manufacturer, I think what Ben has put in place, and he knows what a world championship winning manufacturer needs, he had many, many years at Mercedes, it's there. This was a start from scratch operation that was kind of made to fit for the new regulations. So rather than needing to adapt a company to suit rules that had come, we've got a cost cap, dyno restrictions, testing restrictions, all those sort of other elements. The regulations came first, and then Red Bull built the company around it. So it's kind of fit for purpose. And I think this was one of the reasons that Ben signed up for this project in the first place. But he also said, and I thought this was quite interesting, he said there was another aspect that came out, and he said he'd love to have been a genius and thought of this when it happened, but it was almost an unintended consequence of their play. Is that because the Red Bull project is so bold and audacious, he says, and when it was first announced to us, we thought, what are they doing? They're completely crazy to be doing something like this. He says it's actually brought along the right kind of staff and personnel. He says, so those people who are conservative and don't want to push forward with ideas, take a bit of a gamble and do something different, they've not bought into the project. They stayed where they are and aren't a part of Red Bull. Whereas those people who have this vision, who are bold themselves, who are audacious themselves, who want to do things different and shake up the order, they've come on board, and it's just created this kind of personnel that are pushing on with this mentality and approach that has been an unintended consequence of what they've done. So I think he's very bullish for the long term, but he's not silly enough to declare any confidence for the year ahead. He told us last night that, you know, any person who declares confidence about what's to come is normally someone prepared about to lose.
Yeah, somebody who would call it unstoppable, say nobody would do that. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the Ford involvement. They came into the project later on, so this wasn't launched with Ford. Red Bull set it up, started the wheels in motion, and then they got Ford on board as a partner. What do we know about the involvement it's actually got technically? We know the direct metal laser sintering. I think if I got the right, direct laser metal sintering, got it in the right order, which is a form of additive manufacturing, 3D printing. It's the thing that they keep talking about.
Yeah, I think the main benefit that Ford has brought in the short term is primarily being something that can help fast track Red Bull's progress. Ben talked about this yesterday, talked about this sintering machine. So that's been a huge help because they can produce parts now much, much quicker than if they had to go to outside manufacturers. So it's helped fast track their development progress. But I think it also followed on personnel too, that when Ben joined the startup, there were, I think, 5 staff members. They've had to expand up to 700. And trying to get hold of the right people, qualified engineers, people who understand power units, electrical aspects, batteries, all those things is quite hard in the Formula One environment when people have contracts and periods of gardening leave and all that. So what he pointed out yesterday was he's been able to tap into Ford for this. So if he's needed engineers of expertise on batteries, or engineers of expertise in running dynos, or engineers of expertise in other aspects of engines, go into Ford. Ford can provide these personnel, and it's just pushing that project forward and kind of fast tracking it. So it's not necessarily a case of Ford having direct staff rolling into the Red Bull factory and taking a control of a certain component. I think it's Red Bull's ability to tap into what Ford can have has been the key driver right now.
Yeah, and there's a few Ford personnel based in the UK now as well who've been seconded to that project. But it's very clear this is a Red Bull project with Ford putting some money in. And actually, if you look at the history of Ford in Formula One, they do very, very well when they put money into an engine program, the whole Cosworth DFE. They do less well when they own things, including, of course, the fact they owned Red Bull Racing back in its Jaguar days. Funnily enough, the Jaguar years didn't get a mention during the launch. I wonder why. So I actually think that's a good place for Ford to be in, but obviously they want to talk up how much they're doing. How about the whole question, Mark, about the compression ratio trick? Anything revealed about that?
Yeah, it was interesting. I asked Ben about this yesterday, and he kind of had a very brief thought about it. His answer was quite intriguing, but he basically said that the 16:1 compression ratio that's come in for this year is too low. He says it's very, very easy for manufacturers to be running power units much higher, and the ease by which it can run higher means he said 1/10 of a compression ratio brings a decent performance gain. So he said what they're doing, as far as I know, is absolutely legal, no questions over it at all. He wouldn't confirm they're playing around with compression ratios, but you can read between the lines of what he said. He said that their aim would be to be at 15.99 when the engine's measured, and that's the only thing that ultimately matters, because pass the FI checks, your car is declared legal and there isn't a problem. So he said that other manufacturers who are stirring the pot a little bit, we know that Audi, Honda and Ferrari have written to the FIA, they're seeking clarification. There's still the potential for protest over the matter if things aren't resolved. He thinks there's a lot of noise. He said he'd be surprised if other people aren't doing it, because thermal expansion within engines is something that has gone on ever since the internal combustion engine was created.
Did you like the augmented reality thing they did? They had the engine illustrations, the engine renders kind of floating above the crowd. I thought it was quite a nice idea. It wasn't the clearest thing to watch, but it was quite cool. And they had They had Callum Nicholas there, the former mechanic with Red Bull, who was talking people through it, along with Phil Prue in particular from Red Bull Powertrain. So it was nice to see a basic rendering of a power unit. So that helped the storytelling a bit, didn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea. Good to see the power unit come together. I was quite taken aback by how big the battery pack looked. It looked absolutely immense, but I guess they've got to be, if you're now 50% of the power's coming from the battery. So I thought the idea was great. The idea of an augmented reality and pulling all these parts was all great, but I think didn't quite hit the mark in terms of an on-stage show, because this big engine hanging over crowds and all that sort of aspect. I don't know what it looked like when you were there, but I'd quite like to have a little play around with it. I don't know if that power unit's available and we can have a bit of a mess around with some funky VR goggles on somewhere.
Yeah, I was hoping that they will make that publicly available, because it's not going to give away any particular secrets. It's not super detailed. It's not design schematics, but it's sight of a power unit. There's so much intrigue around those that I imagine, and I'd be interested to hear feedback on this, if you're a fan who has watched that, whether it's at a sensible time of the day or if you're in Europe and you watched it live. I presume that's probably one of the things that people got quite excited about. So, a positive step again in just peeling back a little bit of the curtain of 2026. Right, this event wasn't just about Red Bull, it was also about Racing Bulls, John. I must admit, I felt that the 12, 13 minutes they devoted to the team felt a little bit skiddery afterthought, as I like to call it. Is that me being a bit harsh?
I don't think so. I had the same impression as well, that you had this long, was it an hour and 7 minutes of a launch show, and then you watched it all along, came along, and then at the very, very end, they tucked in Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad with the cars, and Peter Bayer and Alan Permain came out. So it didn't seem to have, didn't have equal billing, but equally it seemed to have been shunted so far to the end. For a team that actually has started to stand a bit up on its own 2 feet at the moment, making progress, quite exciting. They've got building their own unique fan base, I think, as well. So whether it's time for Racing Bulls to have their own bespoke separate launch to everything or not, but I think I agree with you. It did seem to be a bit of the support act being pushed to the very, very end.
It's such a strange team in terms of positioning, because they seem to be leaning more on the junior team element, the talent incubator, as they called it, a couple of times. And obviously they were talking about the kind of young creators that they've been getting along, which is all good stuff to get the team out there. But I did find the stuff they tried to do with the drivers, the kind of duff script that poor old Liam Lawson was given about having to respond to social media admins asking questions. And just, you can't do anything with that kind of thing, really, so it's not the driver's fault, but it just came across as a little bit forced, didn't it, in terms of trying to give the team a distinct identity. I guess that's the problem the team's always had. Yeah,
because they've been quite aggressive with social media. I know you and I have done paddock videos in the past, and I think was it in Montreal when we got they ended up standing right behind us trying to get Kimi Antonelli to kick a football through a goal or something. So they do an awful lot. I think a lot of people like it. But I think these things also have a danger of, if you talk too much about them and try to say what a great job you're doing, it actually backfires, because people get resistant to it, because these things have to just be natural, and you do them, they become successful, and people like them because they like them, not because they're told to like them. So, we'll see what happens. And the livery itself looked fine. I quite liked last year's livery. It's been tweaked for this year, a little bit more blue, I think. But we need to see the car and what it can do on tracks. That's what really ultimately matters.
I thought it was quite funny with Racing Bulls that they really tried to kind of make it seem young and vibrant and exciting and new things. But actually, I thought the best and most natural bit of it all was done by Alan Permain, the team principal. He's late 50s, but he's a pro, isn't he? So he knows how to do this. But he sort of sincerely talked about, it's only very brief, but he talked about the fact that his first F1 team was a Ford engine team with Benetton, first championship going back decades, obviously, to 89. He started in Formula 1. I just thought it was quite funny that actually the person who on paper would fit in the least with that kind of image actually gave it the nicest little moment, didn't it? Just almost by accident.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Permain is a fantastic character. He kind of knows Formula 1 inside out. He's worked at all ranks. He's taken on a completely new job towards the end of last year as team principal when Lauren Mekies moved to Red Bull. But he's loving the challenge. He's a hugely competitive person. He's someone who lives and breathes Formula One. I remember speaking to him when he got dropped by Alpine and had to have a year out. He said he hated it. He said having been a part of Formula One for so long to then not be in it. He said he was quite miserable those first few races. He wasn't at it. Came back to Formula One, absolutely loving his job. Then has been given the team principal role, but stepped into it very, very well. I think it's a team that suits him. And I'm quite excited to see what he can do with it, because he's a hugely competitive person. Beneath that kind of outward smile and that love of Formula One, he likes nothing more than winning and being successful, and will do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah, and it's a team that has generally, over recent years, in terms of its Constructors' Championship position, underachieved a little bit. It's often found perhaps a place lower down than it could have been. So overall, there's some good progress there, but it'd be good to see it putting together a really strong, relentless season, shall we say. But of course, we don't know whether the car will retain some of those benign characteristics of last year's one. There's no reason for it to, given it's such a different set of regulations. But of course, your methodology, your ideas, your underlying science knowledge that did one car goes into the next one. So who knows? And interesting as well to see the drivers. It's actually a fascinating lineup, isn't it? Because you've got Arvid Lindblad, who perhaps some people watching won't have seen. He seemed very comfortable at home, very highly rated. So exciting prospect for him. And Liam Lawson, who's really interesting because finally he might actually have a season where he stays in one team all the way through it and has a full season, which he hasn't had before, because he's had 2-part seasons, and his one full season was one where he got axed by Red Bull after a couple of races. And if he can sustain his best work, his best 4 or 5 weekends were really strong, more consistently, then he's a driver who actually could make quite a big impact this year if the car's good.
Yeah, I think stability will help Liam a lot. It's been an absolute roller coaster of half seasons. Just when he seemed to have got the golden opportunity at Red Bull, work all winter, it was all taken away from him after 2 races. Things just didn't click. That could have destroyed him. He could have completely lost it, and performance trailed away, been out of Formula One, and who knows what he would be doing now. But he dug down, took a while, got a car honed around him at Racing Bull, some suspension tweaks that came similar to what Lando Norris did, just gave him the feel for the front end that he so needs. So I think, bedded in a team he likes, with a clear opportunity now to push on. He's the team leader. They're going to need to rely on him to push on development, drive that progress forwards. And I think this is the chance to see what the real Liam Lawson's like. So I don't think we've seen very much of it at all.
Yeah, and it would be a good story if he can turn this kind of opportunity to stay on when there was a point where it looked like he might not continue. If he can turn that into Baku level performances where he was really strong last year. Austria is another one, not just in terms of the overall where he was running, but just his execution, then could be very, very interesting. Let's finish on Red Bull. We haven't talked about Max Verstappen as yet. He was there. He briefly spoke. His main thing was when he was showing off the new clothing offering to show everyone his ass, as he put it, by giving a little spin. But he was kind of typical Max, wasn't he? He wasn't going to make any bold predictions. He was there, did the professional job, but not giving anything away.
Yeah, I thought it was Max at his finest, because we know he's got some resistance to these rules. He's a bit sceptical about how the energy deployment's going to work. He's a bit sceptical about if the racing's going to be good. He's a bit sceptical about whether these cars are going to be fun to drive. So, but the launch isn't the right place to be criticising rules and offering any doubts. So I think he did a very good job, smiled the right thing. So he's intrigued to know how it all plays out and what happens. I think what will be more telling is his mood after Barcelona. I think his mood after Barcelona will tell us an awful lot about this kind of season that Max Verstappen will be having than where he is right now. Because I think Ben Hodgkinson summed this up quite well when we spoke to him yesterday. He said, right now it's like all the manufacturers are in a 400-meter race, which is effectively a sprint. Except they're all doing it alone in their own stadium with no crowds and all in different countries. So they're all running at their own pace. They're all confident. They're quick. But until they all come together in the same venue, nobody knows who's ahead.
Exactly, and nobody knows what the route they will be taking is, because Red Bull could go so many different ways, couldn't it? It could be an amazing story and they're doing brilliantly well. It could be a disaster. And the big storyline early in the season is, where's Max Verstappen going to go? Is he going to walk away from Red Bull and join another team? And what are they going to do to pull it back? Or it could be somewhere in between. So we are, when we do the launch podcast, going to finish on a little bit of a prediction. I don't want to necessarily ask for a position, but what would be your best guess on what to expect from Red Bull Racing and its own power unit with Ford backing this year?
I'd be surprised if they're fighting for the World Championship. I think that as a first-year manufacturer against the might of someone like Mercedes, who's had years of experience and resource and knows the challenges and have a lot more cars to develop. So I still think Mercedes are going into the season as favourites, but I think Red Bull will be stronger than people perhaps feared initially. I'd expect them to be in the top half of the field, fighting for podiums. And I wouldn't rule out wins. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think it's going to happen early on. I think if Mekies comes to a team launch, and we know Andrea Stella did this in the past when he played down expectations. If you go to a launch and say, we've got some headaches and challenges and sleepless nights to come, that means because you're bracing for the worst and things aren't looking perfect. So they'll power through this, and I think they'll come out and probably end the season in quite a decent step, but it probably won't be a smooth journey to get there.
Yeah, they're going to be a really interesting team to follow. I'd be in a similar sort of place. I reckon if I had to put some money on it, I'd say that there'll be at least a win along the way. But yeah, a championship bid would be remarkable, not because of any lack of quality on the powertrain side, but just in terms of the fact they have built it from the ground up, as we talked about, and it's just everything gelling, and those last few fractions of a percent can make all the difference. But yeah, this is going to be one of the big talking points in pre-season testing. We'll be very quickly hoping to get a handle on where Red Bull is. Well, thanks very much, John, for your insights. Thanks to everybody who's interacted with us, given us feedback, chatted to us through the Race Members Club and various other means. We're going to be with you all the way through launch season and pre-season testing, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.